I went into REI. This is how every bad story starts. I walked into REI. Welcome back, backpackers. In today's video, I want to talk about 7 things I wish I knew about climbing 14ers before I started climbing 14ers. If you're new here to the channel, you may not know this is my 3rd season going on climbing 14ers in Colorado. I've done 22 of the 28 14ers, so probably won't knock them out this summer, perhaps next summer or the summer after. I'm not in too big of a hurry to knock them out. I do want to try to enjoy it, but I have done 22 of them, and there are some things I've learned along the way that I'd love to share with you here today. And before we get into it, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you to please like and subscribe. And with that being said and out of the way, let's get into it. Point number 1, one of the first things I wish somebody had told me before I started climbing 14ers is to not get caught up in my gear. I have a backpacking background. If you're not new to this channel, if you've been around for a little while, you know I've done some backpacking, a little bit of mountaineering and the Pacific Northwest, but I've done tons of backpacking for the past 15 years in the Smokies and New Mexico, California, Washington, Oregon, even Colorado. I've done tons of backpacking. That's really where my background is. And when I moved to Colorado 2 years ago and wanted to start climbing the 14ers, for some reason I felt like my gear just wasn't up to snuff, and I would get caught up in going into REI and looking at the brand new Arc'teryx, super lightweight backpack and thinking, that's what I need to go climb a 14er. I have to have that backpack before I go climb a 14er. When I had a very good green Osprey day pack that would work just fine. A couple other things that I was getting hung up on as well. I mean, my shoes, for example, I didn't have nice trail shoes at the time. That was something that held me back, so I ended up just starting to hike in my A6 running shoes, which for some mountains works just fine. There's plenty of people who hike and climb in tennis shoes, or some that hike and climb in sandals. I've seen before. Ultimately, I did get a nice pair of trail shoes. I got some On Clouds that worked great, but again, it was something that early on held me back, and I felt like, I can't climb a 14er until I get the proper footwear, which was silly. But I felt like I had to have this. I went into REI. This is how every bad story starts. I walked into REI. And I saw this nice Benchmade pocket knife, and I just really felt like I needed that Benchmade pocket knife before I wandered off into the backcountry of Colorado, as if the knife I've been carrying for the past 10 years wasn't sufficient enough. Like I said, don't get caught up in the gear. Likely, if you do have a day hiking or a backpacking background, especially in the summertime, you can start getting into the 14ers, and that prevented me from getting into climbing probably by about a month, maybe 6 weeks. It was just something that really held me back. I was my own worst enemy during that time. Point number 2. Always know you can turn back, and this is something that delayed my trips even further. When I first started climbing 14ers, I kind of had a mental block of, maybe I shouldn't go just quite yet, because what if I start at the mountain and I can't make the summit? Well, that's always the case, that you might not be able to make the summit. The summit is simply a destination. It's the goal we have in mind. We would like to get there. But at the end of the day, all we're really doing is attempting 14ers. We're not there to conquer 14ers or climb 14ers. We're there to attempt them. Don't let that mental block get in your way of just simply not going or delaying your trip because you have some sort of fear that you might tell people, like, oh, what are you doing this weekend? Well, I'm going to go climb a 14er. And then you're afraid that you might not be able to make it, especially early on when you haven't done any yet, or you've done very few. There might be a little bit of hesitancy there. But again, in that case, like the first point, you're your own worst enemy. So don't allow that to happen. Point number 3. You don't necessarily have to have a 4x4 to get to the trailhead or to go climb a 14er. So a lot of people don't know this. There's a bunch of, I really can't think of an example where this is not the case, but there is typically a 2-wheel drive trailhead and then a 4x4 trailhead up further. Just because you have a Camry doesn't mean you can't go out and climb 14ers. Having a Jeep, having a 4Runner, a Subaru, having a Toyota, what's the other one? The truck, the Tacoma. Essentially, those are going to be vehicles that are going to make your hiking a lot easier. You're going to see plenty of those out in the Colorado backcountry, but you don't have to have them. It's not a requirement. There's a lot of people who are willing to pick you up if you are a person who has a 2-wheel drive vehicle and you park at the 2-wheel drive trailhead and you start walking up to the 4x4 trailhead. There's a lot of individuals who, if they pass you, they'll offer you a ride. I do that to a lot of people. Some people take me up on it, some people don't. Either way is fine. But you don't have, point being, you don't necessarily have to have a 4x4 vehicle to enjoy the Colorado wilderness. Not at this point, anyways. Point number 4, don't let others intimidate you. So this was another one where I was getting in my own way. Maybe you can even say I was allowing others to get in my way as well. But it was just, in sometimes when you talk to other people about climbing 14ers, sometimes even though their intentions are good and they're well placed and they're excited about their stories, it can still lead you to feel a certain way about yourself. I remember when I was living in Fort Collins, I went to a donut shop. Man, what was the name of that donut shop? That was a good donut shop. I can't remember. If I can remember, I'm going to look up that donut shop later. I'll put it in the top comment. Fantastic donut shop if you're ever in Fort Collins. Great place. But I remember I was talking to a guy in there one time, and I would just small talk, asking, how was your day? How's your day? Good. And he mentioned that he just climbed Long's Peak the day before. I was like, wow, you just climbed Long's Peak. Long's Peak you can see from Fort Collins. And so I asked him, I said, well, how was it? And he said, man, it was just so hard. It was a day. It really wiped me out. And I'm looking at this guy. He looks like a marathon runner. He's got a runner's body. And then I'm thinking about myself. I'm just built like a brick house. And I'm thinking, man, can I actually do that trip? Do I have what it takes? Do I need to look like a marathon runner before I go do Long's Peak? It was a situation where he was not trying to intimidate me. He was just telling me his story, but I'm adding in extra context that's not really there. It is there. He does look like a runner, but again, it's a point where I am introducing my own self-doubts when I shouldn't have done it. And in time, I've learned it's hike your own hike. Maybe these individuals can hike faster, but if you just find your pace and you're in shape and you know what you're doing, you can get to the top of some 14ers. Let's do a little coffee break before point number 5. Oh, that's good coffee. Black coffee, a little bit of cream. So I guess it's not black coffee when you put cream in it. Point number 5, break in your shoes. This seems like a very obvious point to a lot of people, including myself. I know this cardinal rule, and I've broken this cardinal rule before. So when I first started 14ers, I was just climbing in a pair of running shoes. I think I did Grays and Tories in running shoes. I did Quandary in running shoes. Which ones? I did Bierstadt, I think, in running shoes maybe. And at some point I realized I need some trail shoes, some good trail shoes. So I went to REI. Spent way too much money there. So I got to REI and I told the lady, hey, I need some running shoes, not running shoes. What did I tell her? I told her I needed trail shoes. Trail shoes, that's what we're talking about, trail shoes. Given the nature of 14ers, you definitely should not be breaking in your shoes on a 14er. A million miles straight up, you hit the summit, and then it's a million miles straight back down. And since you have the two extremes of those worlds, it leaves you susceptible to a lot of blisters, which I did ultimately rub on Mount Massive. Don't break in your running shoes on a 14er. Take them out to a nice trail. Take your dog for a walk around your town. Break them in there. I know you're excited to get into the backcountry. We've all heard this rule before, but I think we've also all broken this rule before. Just a good reminder, break in your trail shoes. Moving right along, point number 6, be off the summit well before noon. I think we've all heard be off the summit by noon, and I completely disagree with this rule. We need to be off the summit by about 10, 10:30, maybe even 11. That's typically what I shoot for. And the two examples I have of this are the time I did Quandary. We had a nice hailstorm blow up at about 11 o'clock. Thank goodness I was down at that point. Tons of thunder and lightning. And then a year later, in the summertime, when I did Long's Peak with Natalie and Jonathan, we had to get off by about 9 o'clock in the morning. And by the time we had made it back down to the boulder field, pretty good sized storm was rolling in from the Mummy Range from the north. And so that was an instance where we definitely did not want to be up on the summit at that point. And it's incredible. You can have a storm rolling and lightning cracking around and people are still trying to head up. I completely disagree with that. If a storm is rolling in, if you have thunder, if you have lightning, you certainly turn back. The summit will be there for another day. And my last point, not everybody wants to be your friend on the trail, but just because they don't want to be your friend doesn't mean they're a bad person. So I've met tons of people on the trail doing Long's Peak 2 years ago. I met Jonathan and Natalie. previously two complete strangers to me. They ended up being great friends, great summiting companions. I've met Evan and Alec and Paul over on Mount Elbert. I've met some individuals down in the San Juan. So I've met tons of good people out on the trail, and you will too if you start doing, any type of backcountry travel. But for as many people you're going to meet in the backcountry that do become your friends and are very nice, you're going to meet plenty of individuals who don't want to talk to you as well. That's not necessarily a reflection of you or them, it's just simply the nature of how humans interact. Sometimes we just don't want to talk to people because we're in our own heads about our own problems. Maybe that's work or relationships or whatever it might simply be. Always do the courtesy of saying hello to somebody, and if we want to go further from there, so be it. And if not, I'll just let people have their own space. There's plenty of backcountry and there's plenty of wilderness for all of us to spread out. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. That was 7 things I wish I knew before I started climbing 14ers. We're about to go back out to Colorado here in a month, so if you enjoyed the video, if you watched all the way to the end, please like and subscribe. Would love to have you here in the Pie Top family, and we will see you in the next one.